Record. Okay. So hi, I'm Elisa de Fuente.
I'm Emma Salter.
I'm Sara Strassner.
So I'm just gonna start talking about how in the United States specifically, there are a lot of things that don't sit right with me. So for one, our country is seen as a place of opportunity, yet we make it almost impossible for people to change their situations in life, whether that be financially, educationally, or even things like their reputation. And we also preach diversity, yet and we claim that we're like a tossed salad, but oddly enough, in a Pew Research study, a majority of people said that when they picture America, they picture a white society. And to be honest, that's how I picture it too when I close my eyes. And going even further than race, when our countries face people of different sexualities or genders, they face social sanctions and aren't accommodated and aren't widely accepted. And that's pretty terrible. And we also describe ourselves as a world superpower. Um, and we're like one of the best countries at production, manufacturing, and technology, yet simultaneously we are full of unemployment and people are constantly losing their jobs, and we're producing so much waste, which is literally killing our planet. So today we are going to cover the topics of capitalism, gender, economic status, objectification, and the media. And specifically, we're going to argue that the United States' capitalist society is a direct cause of the common individual's view of gender expression and people with disabilities, and also a direct cause of poverty and ageism, all of which are further perpetuated by the media.
So I'm going to start talking about the radical visibility. It's basically society views transgender individuals as something that needs to be like changed. And there's many issues with it, and it needs to be reworked. While trans people exist, and they've always existed, mainstream society has yet to fully embrace all individuals. And capitalism and media play a large role in what needs to be adjusted and reworked to, fit the existence of trans folks. There are many views on transgender individuals that come from society and the media. One quote from the reading that I felt kind of proved some of the struggles that transgender individuals face is when it says, "It wasn't until 2013 that the American Psychiatric Association removed gender identity disorder from the pages of Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders." And then the current DSM-5 has replaced gender identity disorder with gender dysphoria, which erases the fact that not all trans people are dysphoric. A long quote on page 91, but it basically means that until 2013, gender identity disorder was considered a mental health disorder rather than something inherent to the person's life. And they labeled it as gender dysphoria, which is also now considered a mental illness. And that's an issue because it's still labeled as an illness in the medical field, which continues to leave transgendered individuals marginalized. Another quote in the reading that kind of described what radical visibility is. It says, "It's a call to action, to dress in order to not be ignored, to reject passing and dissimulation." This means that there needs to be clothing reform for those who are transgender and or disabled, because there's a lack of availability to comfortable and stylish clothing, like there is for most other people. Clothing and undergarments are hard to find for transgendered and disabled individuals. And as we read in the reading, cultural norms don't encourage trans and disabled people to dress stylishly or loudly. Society wants us to blend in and not draw attention to ourselves. Basically, they don't have easy access to clothing that is, like I said, easy and comfortable, and as well as showing who they are, like as an expression. And that will have to continue to change, or radical visibility will have to continue to change as certain things become more available and normalized. And transgender individuals face many struggles in mainstream society. One way is the lack of legal protection. Although there are laws against discrimination in the workplace, there are no laws stating that it's illegal to discriminate based on gender identity. And then another struggle is poverty. According to the Human Rights Campaign, approximately 29% of transgender adults are impoverished. And being impoverished leads many transgender folks to jobs that are not ideal, such as sex work. And this goes hand in hand with the ideology that trans folks, as well as many others, are set up to fail in our system. Excuse me. To quote from the reading, "One clothing line cannot destroy societal oppression. We need something widely accessible so that anyone can participate. I suggest a politically forceful aesthetic style we called radical visibility. Physical visibility is an important step toward political and social freedom and equality." This is essentially saying that in order to create change, there needs to be more influence and action taken to create a more open society rather than the oppressive one that exists. And there needs to be more than one brand that caters to transgender and disabled individuals to help create the change and acceptance needed. Excuse me. In the media, such as in movies and television, transgender folks have had a narrative created about them in which is false. In movies such as Psycho and Silence of the Lambs, for example, the murderer in both movies are cross-dressing from male to female. And this makes people view trans individuals as psycho and scary, violent and murderous. And in television, it's kind of the opposite. Trans folks are seen as victims. Crime TV like Law and Order, SVU, and CSI New York, there have been times where trans people are the victims of heinous crimes and murder. And there is one reason and motive for this, and it's because that they are transgender. And another important scenario to mention is in medical television, like Chicago Med and Grey's Anatomy. Trans individuals fall ill due to complications with the hormones they take or medical issue from their assigned birth gender, such as breast cancer or prostate cancer. These are not only stereotypes, but set a narrative that there is not much else to trans individuals than what we see on our television or in other forms of media. And these struggles are caused in part by capitalism. Capitalism enforces the view that the highest form of success is through capital or money. It also enforces the idea that anyone can succeed as long as they work hard enough. However, as long as hiring discrimination exists, and it always has, trans people will get hired less and remain and fall into lower income status. Further, as long as capitalism is the norm and thus our healthcare isn't free, gender affirmation surgeries remain exorbitantly expensive and further putting trans folks into debt, which paints trans people in a negative light, making people think that trans people like expect the world to cater to them or that they don't want to work, which is obviously a big issue. And then among other issues, feminism and gore capitalism can also negatively influence views on transgender folks. Mainstream feminism does not represent trans and non-binary individuals. It caters to cisgender, particularly white cisgender women. And then as far as gore capitalism, it affects transgender people because of the violence that's seen throughout all forms of media. We see guns and other major weaponry on television, movies, and all other forms of media. And for example, drug cartels, they utilize violence as a commodity to increase profits and become richer and richer because of it. Trans folks have become more represented in the media in the past few years than ever before. However, it tends to be done incorrectly, or if at all. And more often than not, transgender men are not shown in the media, especially compared to transgender women. And most times men are dressing in stereotypical women's clothes in movies and shows, such as Mrs. Doubtfire and Dallas Buyers Club. In both of these, the main character dressed in women's clothes to portray a woman to either, get what they want, or to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. Or just to portray a woman, or like a transgender woman. And these are both issues because they suggest that either women only want to receive things because of how they appear, and that's the only way they'll receive things. But also there's an issue with men playing transgender women because it's just not the truth. And having portrayals of transgender women should be done by actual transgender women, and same goes for transgender men. They should be the actors that are playing transgender men roles. So, yeah.
In terms of people with disabilities, they also face a lot of issues, particularly with the way that they are viewed by the general population. They are typically viewed as a population group who is suffering and in need of acute relief from pain and suffering. This often leads to objectification, where they are seen only as their disability and not as the person as a whole. There's a lot of issues surrounding that in terms of things like them being seen as in a perpetual state of childhood, or a perpetual state of needing extra care or assistance, which can lead to issues with gaining careers. Because of this, people think they're not able to complete complex tasks, or they're in need of those accommodations. These things could be thought of as disadvantages in a workforce that main value lies in profit. To quote the human as waste, the labor theory of value and disposability in contemporary capitalism. In capitalism, nature is the use value that embodies labor power, the actual source of profit. A person who may not be able to produce a product as quickly as an able-bodied person would not be seen as valuable as that person in a capitalist society. Time loss equals product loss, which equals profit loss, which would decrease their chances of getting hired. In terms of needing accommodations, that could very well be an expense that the company is required to pay for, which once again would equal profit loss, because they have to put out money in order to keep this employee. And so once again, they're not seen as valued laborers, and so they receive those less job opportunities. An example of this in recent memory and in the media was in Sia's movie Music, which was supposed to be an inspirational film about a child with autism. She had hired a disabled actress to portray the role of Music in the movie. However, the actress had issues with her disability on set, and instead of making the accommodations to make the film more accessible to the actress, Sia just fired her and hired an able-bodied actress to portray the role. There are also issues with radical visibility. As stated before, they are often not given clothing that is accessible to them, and when they are, it is often catered toward older populations. There's not a lot in teen and child sizes, and the styling, again, is not attractive. It's not meant to be stylish. They're meant to be seen as background or invisible. And there's also issue with it not being great for active activities, because they assume that people with disabilities are not going to be more active, or at least not active by themselves. There's been some increasing in accessibility in terms of clothing, especially in styling. An example of this in stories like Aerie, they create specifically accessible clothing for disabled people, and they attempt to make it stylish and also active wear so that they can work out, they can do activities that require more movement. However, it's not super widespread. And that becomes an issue because if only one store produces it, then groups of people are are not able to receive the clothing that they would want or need. There's also the issue of assuming that only older people are disabled. So once again, you're leaving out the children and the adolescents and young adults. And also assuming that older people who are disabled don't want stylish clothing, which in itself is ageism. In terms of how disabled people are portrayed in the media, they're often tokenized or used to make company or outlet seem inclusive. Once again, I think this is used to increase profit because those companies assume because disabled people lack representation, they're willing to accept any representation that they are given. Like I stated before, it is often able-bodied actors playing the roles of disabled people. So those portrayals are less accurate to the person's actual life. I would say probably for every one actual disabled person playing a disabled role, there's about 100 able-bodied people playing disabled roles. They're also often seen in four stereotypical roles. There's the victim, which is where they're being portrayed as in desperate need of charity, and those who help them are often the main character and are seen as heroic. They're also depicted as needing a cure for their ailments. This is often used as what can be called inspiration porn to make able-bodied people feel better about themselves, as they're portrayed as the disabled people are portrayed as objects to be pitied rather than subjects with meaningful lives and stories. And the able-bodied people are seen as heroes in that story to help this person with this disability improve their life. There's also the hero stereotype where they're shown as extraordinary or heroic purely based off of their disability. This is often seen in news media where they talk about a disabled person doing an everyday thing like graduating college, and they use words like inspirational, brave, or courageous. The focus is usually on the impairment rather than the individual themselves once again. And then there's the villain stereotype, which is often associated with mental illness, and that being the reason behind that person's violent or erratic behavior. A great example of this is the recent Joker movie, where he is portrayed as having schizophrenia. This further perpetuates the stigma that people with schizophrenia are inherently violent. There's also the issue where they are being portrayed as acting out because they're angry at the fact that they are disabled, whether they were born that way or had an incident. So they're trying to get back at the world, and they're just angry because of their disability. If they never had this disability, they would never be this angry. And therein lies the issue. And then there's the eternally innocent stereotype, where they're seen as childlike and or angelic because of their disability. They're often seen as also like the spirit guide for the main character because they're naive and sweet, and they're helpful they're helpful for helping their normal peers understand and overcome their flaws, leading to their own personal redemption. Once again, the disabled person is often not the main focus of the story. It's the able-bodied person that they are interacting with. They are also often portrayed as wishing they could be normal, or as if their lives are not worth living because of their disability. An example of this is the movie Me Before You, where a man becomes quadriplegic and ends up taking his own life because he feels like he can't live his life up to the fullest with his disability. There's also the issue of most of the portrayals being males with disabilities instead of females. There's often not a lot of female representation, which alienates women from being seen as disabled. And there's also been an issue with not enough diagnosing of women with disabilities because they are not assumed to have disabilities due to the portrayals in the media.
For sure. So, like I mentioned before, our country is seen as a huge superpower, and we are capitalists, which means that our economy and political systems are majorly controlled by private ownership for profit. And we have huge manufacturers, huge companies, and so many manners of buying and selling. So, we also have an economy of speed, which, aside from the meaning with drug cartels, means essentially that our country is very much like go, 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 and is trying to do things as fast as they can, like and before like other countries. So that is applying to both country to country and also business to business. So this means that there's always going to be a food chain and a head honcho, big rich person that is like all the way up top, and then all the way at the bottom, people struggling to survive. And also, let's not forget that the top 1% of US households hold 15 times more wealth than the bottom 50% combined, which, in my opinion, nobody should be able to make that much money while other people are so much more poor. And it just seems impossible to me. But again, like I said before, a lot of things in America don't really make much moral sense. So getting back to capitalism, that head honcho needs to make money somehow, and I'm also going to kind of generalize and call these like businessmen because they're mostly men, which is a whole nother issue. So these men need to make money, right? And how do they get it? How do they make the product they can sell? And how do they do the services that they offer? Because I would be so shocked if I found out that these rich men did the work themselves. Of course, shocker, they don't. And in fact, in a vast majority of situations, these business men leech onto minimum wage labor to do their work, which is really terrible in my opinion because these minimum wage workers or people getting paid way way less than like the head honcho guys do the dirty work and barely see the money that they work towards, because although minimum wage is supposed to be livable, it actually isn't, or usually isn't. And these hard workers struggle to make ends meet most of the time, and they're pretty much exploited by these rich business owners men. And in so many instances as well, people lose their jobs to machines because machines can work faster than humans can, which is what is most important, getting the job done as fast as possible. So in our tendencies to do things as fast and as efficiently as we can, and the importance of turning a profit as fast as you can, it costs so many people jobs. But capitalism obviously doesn't care. It's the cause of it. So this is where our definition of body disposability comes in, which is essentially the idea that we are needed for our bodies to do work. Until there is a machine that can replace us and do our job, we are needed for that manual labor. Yet, even though we are so needed to do our jobs, if there's an event where we can't do our jobs, or we're seen as not doing our jobs well enough, or not doing our jobs fast enough, we are disposable, which means we can be replaced so easily and so quickly, which is to me kind of dehumanizing because we don't really matter in the grand scheme of things to these rich people. And so we're also disposable in the sense that a lot of human beings work tirelessly and honestly kind of wreck their bodies in order to do their job, which there's a reason why so many people have so many health problems and body pain so early in life, because we work until we can't work anymore, which isn't normal to other countries. But to us, it's like the result of capitalism. And for me personally, I work retail full time while I'm in school, and I really resonated with the article Human as Waste, because I've seen how it works on a more micro level where I look at us minimum wage workers or like hourly wage workers versus our store director who is salary. And I know for a fact that us working $15 an hour do more manual labor on a daily basis, and honestly probably more work in general for than our store director. And but however, to him, if someone quits, they can be replaced within a day. If someone isn't good enough to do a job, they can get someone else to do that job, and nobody would really notice that person is missing because they will be replaced in an instant. And it's really, really sad. And you can probably imagine how many people will work for years and years until they can't work anymore because they get so physically exhausted from working. So people will just get up and leave and quit their jobs because they can't take it anymore. And like, capitalism isn't good for our bodies, and it makes it really difficult for minimum wage workers to also make a living. And I also want to briefly touch upon another reason why capitalism is terrible. So, because capitalism causes so much unemployment and poverty, um, since people can be replaced by other people, and because they can be replaced by machines, and because in the grand scheme of things, they don't really matter to the rich people at all, even though we are making the money, people still need to make money. And everything in America costs money and is pretty expensive. And so these people working still need to figure out how to pay to live. And this is a lot of reason why people commit crimes and like steal and do drugs and do sex work and work on the black market. And we cause that culture. Like, capitalism causes that, yet we simultaneously look down on it, even though that's like their last option in their eyes. And it doesn't help that the media also portrays like and glosses over what it's like to be working in a capitalist society. It like glamorizes work, which makes it seem not as much of a struggle. And in so many TVs and movies, it focuses on the rich businessman, glamorizing him, making him look super cool and awesome. And they don't take a second to show the people working under him. And even when we watch the news, we hear about all the great things that Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates are doing and how much money they have and like their lifestyle. But we don't hear a second of the people that help keep their businesses running, even though it wouldn't work without those people. So all of this sets an unrealistic expectation of capitalism, and also shows that like the cultivation theory, what we see on social media is what we believe to be reality. So in an article also, older people would rather die than let COVID-19 harm the US economy. That the article, you can really see the dangers of capitalism in that article. It was written in March 2020, so the beginning of the pandemic, and these people, considered elderly, had stated that they would rather keep our economy in a good state for their grandchildren than protect themselves from the coronavirus. At the same time, Trump was preaching, despite the known statistic that 99% of deaths at the time were people over the age of 50, that he wanted to return to normal as soon as possible. Why would he want this to happen? Not necessarily because he was confident that COVID would stop in the spread in a few weeks, because obviously that didn't happen. It's still happening over a year later. He wanted to return to benefit our economy, which is crazy because he thought that our economy would plummet, causing way more deaths from suicide than a deadly virus, which of course, a bad economy is often there's a cause of like suicide with that, but he didn't really prioritize the people who were dying from the virus and was prioritizing the economy instead of the lives. So anyways, older adults saw this and agreed, which is baffling to me. They were the first group besides essential workers to be widely vaccinated, at least in New York. And I can only attribute this mentality to the fact that capitalism is so instilled in their brains that they put it to a higher importance than their own lives, which is crazy to me. I don't know. Capitalism is also behind the idea that like sex sells. So being that what we are told will make us money is a very specific demographic of actors, like we said before too, famous people, authors, and influencers. In the media, we see men of all ages as well, yet we pretty much exclusively see young, attractive women on TV. And this can be attributed to ageism, which is stereotyping and or like discriminating against individuals because of their age. So, what does this say about our society and what Hollywood thinks is not going to sell? Usually, this is women over the age of 35, which was discussed a lot in the interview with Jane and Lily from Grace and Frankie. And they talked a lot about how there weren't too many opportunities to be a star when you're old, from what they said. And they were famous when they were young, yet when they got older, they kind of dropped off. And one of the ladies, I can't remember which one it was, but she was basically saying that once she started getting older, she kind of lost hope for being an actor because she could kind of see like she was feeling worse about herself because of the way that the world was. Like the media doesn't really portray older women very well, and they don't really usually get a good response from audiences. And so she stopped acting until I think it was like 15, 20 years later. So yeah. So it's kind of scary that it kind of drops off when you get older because even though they're already probably rich, it's also their livelihood. And what's even scarier is that because older women aren't getting roles as like a star on TV shows or people with actual substance to their character, older women aren't being represented in the media. They're really limited to being supporting actors or having short features as like the little cute grandma or the old lady or the sad lonely old lady. It's not really a human being, you know? And these characters, like I said, hardly have substance, and which is likely to misrepresent older women. And this can also limit women in real life to hurt like their mentality. So according to like the social cognitive theory, we're more likely to do things that we think we're going to get a good result in. So if older women haven't seen another woman, even if it's shown on TV and it's fiction, if they haven't seen another older woman like them be successful or happy or have a different life than what they have now, they're most likely to limit themselves to what they have seen, which is very unfortunate because they're just putting themselves in a box because of the media. And while it's true that we don't see much older women, we see even less of women over the age of 35 who are not heterosexual and are Black, which is pretty messed up again. So, in the article, Ageism Through Omission, it explains the gap in education and even acknowledgement in the literature and media. And when I read research, being a psych major, you already like have a lot of research knowledge. And when you read the population demographic that is almost always disclosed, I have no recollection of reading about a population of a gay Black senior woman. I don't remember that at all. I don't think I've ever seen that. So to me, because ageism isn't represented, it leaves a lot of silence when it comes to social justice issues. And we don't really know the struggles of Black older individuals. And we don't know their health struggles, their political struggles, their economic struggles because they're not represented. And so we don't know their history, and that can be very dangerous to be lacking that information. So, how can we advocate if the media is omitting them from their research and their literature? How are older Black heterosexual or non heterosexual women going to get information on people like them and experiencing similar things? They really can't. And the article particularly addresses the lack of information surrounding senior Black women in terms of sexual health, which is definitely something that is important to know since it's healthcare information. So, hopefully, older women will be the focus of more information and research if capitalism and the media allow.
Going off of healthcare, I'm going to discuss now about disabled people and their body disposability in terms of ableism within the healthcare field, specifically the discussion that Alice Wong had in Resisting Ableism, Disabled People and Human Gene Editing. First, it is important to state that she talked about how positive technology has been for disabled people and how it has made many positive differences in her life. However, there's a huge amount of ableism in the healthcare field. She, in this case, specifically defines ableism as a form of oppression that systematically devalues disabled people who are considered non-normative in the way they look, behave, move, think, or their way of being in the world. And she states that for all the challenges she faces with her body and health, ableism is by far the greatest barrier in her life. Specifically, she brings up the point of only living to a certain age and says that, like many children with neuromuscular disabilities her age, parents and doctors told her that she would never live past a certain age, and for her that was 30. She also discussed the language of disability and how assumptions surrounding disabled people's lives are usually about them just being full of suffering. And there's a focus, the focus is really on the person's functional limitations, impairments, or deficits. And the discussions on quality of life tends to equate well-being and health as the absence of illness and disability. She also points out the fact that some of the people in the world would rather be dead than be in the position that she is in, based on the perceived loss of control, weakness, and fragility, and how that is ableism. So basically, she's discussing the issue of how, once again, disabled people are only viewed as their disability. They're not viewed as a complex human being. And this becomes an issue because then they're only seen as what is considered not normative and problematic in society, which decreases people's desire to support a community of continued disability. And what I mean by that is supporting research and practices that would remove disability entirely, such as human gene editing. According to the Center for Genetics and Society, human genetic modification is the direct manipulation of the genome using molecular engineering techniques. One of these forms is germline genetic modification, which is gene editing that affects the genes in eggs, sperm, and embryos, or early embryos. And the subsequent generations would also carry those changes. The problem is, like I stated before, the elimination of these genetic conditions would eliminate disabled people in general. They are once again being seen as a disposable group of people. And they're left out of the conversation when it surrounds human gene editing. Alice Wong states that all of us should question and engage in debates on the social and ethical implications of this technology on humanity in the future. Specifically, who is having the power to decide what is being edited and what is considered tolerable? Are disabled people going to be able to advocate for themselves, or is it going to be somebody who finds disabilities to be a burden because disabled people need more assistance for their work, or they can't work as fast or as productively as an able-bodied person? And how will this change society in terms of diversity, human variation, and culture? If we eliminate a whole group of people, specifically because of their genetic disposition or disability, what does that take away from society in general? What will that take away from our culture and how we shape our lives? How will that be seen as inclusive? If we say we're an inclusive society, how can we say that if we're saying, well, let's eliminate the possibility of having disabled people in the future? She also discussed activist Anita Cameron, who's Black, disabled, and a lesbian, who's a longtime activist with ADAPT, which was instrumental in defending Medicaid, who discusses the increased discrimination as a result of human genetic engineering. She said there is going to be a widening of inequality if genetic editing becomes available commercially, even if there are positive aspects to genetic engineering due to the ableist and racist nature of healthcare. Black people, people of color, and people with disabilities will not reap the benefits, if there are any. Instead, they'll be more likely to suffer from negative effects, including increased discrimination that are sure to come from this. Like I said, once again, you're wiping out a group of people. And if somebody can't access that care if they want it because they feel like they need it to improve their lives, they're just going to face discrimination because they don't have enough money, they don't have that status. And then people will see them as even lesser than they already do because, well, you couldn't afford to fix yourself, so you're clearly the issue. So overall, I would like to restate our thesis that the United States capitalist society is a direct cause of the common American individual's view of gender expression and people with disabilities and a direct cause of poverty and ageism, all of which are further perpetuated by the media. I would say that our discussion has proved that point with how we discussed not only inaccurate portrayals in the media, leading to stereotyping and leading to discrimination, but also how our capitalist society and our desire to only attain profit has isolated people who vary in gender expression and identity, people with disabilities, and people who are of an older age or in a lower class position where they cannot achieve a higher career path.